Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I'm Dr. Abdul Wahab, Associate Professor, Department of Pharmacy, Kohat, University of Science and Technology. I am course instructor for the subject Dispensing Pharmacy, and our today topic is suspension and extemporaneous mixtures of suspension. That how can we prepare extemporaneous suspension, extemporaneous mixture of suspension? I know that you have already have studied in your previous semesters about the suspension, but for our today topic extemporaneous mixtures we must have a background knowledge about the suspension. So in our today discussion outlines, first of all we will try to discuss about the suspension, that how can we define suspension, and then qualities of good suspension, advantages and disadvantages of suspension, classification of suspension, preparation of suspension, extemporaneous mixtures of suspension. So these are our today topics about which we are going to discuss in detail. So first of all, I would like to define suspension. That what is suspension? Suspension, it is a coarse dispersion containing finely divided insoluble materials. You should keep in your knowledge, in your mind, that there is a difference between suspension and emulsion. In emulsion we mix two immiscible liquids with the help of emulsifying agents, but over here we in suspension we incorporate the finely divided insoluble material into liquid medium. Like you can see in this definition, coarse dispersion containing finely divided insoluble material suspended in liquid medium are available as dry powder, to be distributed in liquid medium when desired. So in this case, like in emulsion, we mostly incorporate emulsifying agent for the emulsification purpose, but over here one thing should keep in your mind, that instead of emulsifying agent we must incorporate suspending agent. So we must incorporate suspending agent if we are going to prepare suspension. So the particle size range in suspension is from 0.5 millimeter to 50 millimeter. It must be you should keep in your mind that the particles, the finely divided particles, insoluble particles or materials must have the size of 0.5 millimeter to 50 millimeter. So suspensions may contain diffusible solids and indiffusible solids, and may be produced due to chemical reaction. So diffusible solids are those substances which don't dissolve in water, but on shaking they can be mixed with it and remain evenly distributed throughout the liquid, ensuring uniform distribution of the drug in each dose. For example, chalk powder, light kaolin, magnesium oxide, magnesium trisilicate, etc. While indiffusible solids are those substances which don't dissolve in water and don't remain evenly distributed in the vehicle for sufficiently long time to ensure uniformity of the measured dose. So we can say that in preparation of emulsion we can use two types of solid materials. One is diffusible and the other one is indiffusible. So in the examples of indiffusible solids are, for example, aspirin, phenobarbital, sulfur or zinc oxide. Qualities of good suspension. Qualities of a good suspension. The dispersion of particle must be uniform. If we are going to prepare suspension, sorry. So the particles, the insoluble particle, the dispersion or the distribution of the insoluble particle must be uniform. The settling of dispersed particles should be minimum. The settling of dispersed particles should be minimum. It is also the quality of good suspension. The particles should not form a hard cake or sedimentation, because if there is a hard cake, then we can say it is not a good suspension, because on shaking we can't redisperse the hard cake or the particles. So it is also the quality of good suspension that there should be no hard cake formation and sedimentation. Viscosity should be optimum. As I told you that in the preparation of suspension we must use suspending agent. So why we use the suspending agent? For increasing the viscosity, or we can use the viscosity enhancing agents in the preparation of suspension. It should be physically, chemically and microbiologically stable. For a good suspension, it should be physically stable, chemically stable and microbiologically stable. There should be no microbial attack. There should be no microbial growth in suspension. So for that purpose we must use preservative agents. Suspension should be thixotropic. As you know, you have already have a background knowledge about the thixotropic. You have already studied in the physical pharmacy. So again I would like to say thixotropic fluid is a fluid which takes a finite time to attain equilibrium viscosity when introduced to a step change in shear rate. Similarly, appearance should be elegant. It is also the quality of good suspension. Advantages of suspension: it helps in formulation of insoluble drugs in liquid form. Drugs which are unstable in aqueous medium can be formulated in non-aqueous medium. Drugs having unpleasant taste can be formulated in suspension form. If there is any drug which is having unpleasant taste, so we can easily formulate such type of drug in suspension form. Suspension is dosage form to those patients who can't swallow tablets and capsules. We can say that in pediatric patients, we can prescribe the suspension. Similarly, for the elderly, for adult patients, for the aged patients, we can also we can also prescribe suspension instead of tablets and capsules. Suspension prolong the action of drugs. We can say as compared to solution or emulsion, the action of suspension is prolonged. If we want to prolong the action of any drug, so we can incorporate such type of drug in suspension form. Disadvantages of suspension: physically stability, sedimentation and compaction can cause problems. Physical stability, sedimentation and compaction can cause problems. So we must avoid such type of disadvantages. We must work on, if we are going to prepare suspension, we must work, we should consider the physical stability, sedimentation and compaction. It is bulky. Sufficient care must be taken during handling and transport. It is the disadvantages of suspension. It is difficult to formulate as compared to other dosage form like solution, emulsion. The formulation of suspension is a little bit difficult task. Uniform and accurate dose may not be achieved because there may be unequal distribution of the particles in liquid medium. So therefore we can say that there is no uniform and accurate dose sometime. Therefore if we are going to dispense suspension, we must counsel the patient that it should be shake well before use. Classification of suspension. Classification of suspension. Suspension can be classified as based on physical state. The first classification is which is based on physical state, like suspension, aerosol and foams. So these are it is based on the physical state. On the physical state we can classify suspension into these three categories: suspension, aerosol, foam. So aerosol and foams are also the types of suspension which are based on the physical state. Based on proportion of solid particles, dilute suspension. In dilute suspension, the solid particle must be from 2 to 10%, while like for example cortisone acetate, prednisolone acetate, these are the example of suspension which are based on the proportion of solid particles. In these cases, like cortisone acetate suspension, prednisolone acetate suspension, the solid particles, the quantity of the solid particle or the portion of the solid particle is from 2 to 10% weight by volume. Over here we use weight by volume. The solid particles must be in weight form, while the liquid must be in volume. Concentrated suspension. Over here the portion of the solid particle must be 50%. So if this portion or the quantity of the solid particle is 50%, then we can say that it is concentrated suspension. For example, zinc oxide suspension. So zinc oxide suspension is concentrated suspension because in this case the quantity of solid particle is 50%. Based on behavior of dispersed phase. Flocculated suspension. In flocculated suspension, the dispersed phase may be a network of particle. And deflocculated suspension, dispersed phase may consist of discrete particles. And there is another classification of suspension, that is for that we can use the term general classification of suspension. Oral suspension, for example, paracetamol suspension, that is paracetamol suspension, and you can visit the market, and if you want to check the paracetamol suspension, I know that every person have knowledge about the paracetamol suspension. So similarly, topical suspension dispersed phase is in high concentration, often exceeds 20%. Example is calamine lotion. Calamine lotion is the example of topical suspension. And the oral suspension example is paracetamol. Similarly, parenteral suspension solid content is between 0.5 to 5% weight by volume. Example includes procaine penicillin G suspension. Procaine penicillin G suspension. It is the example of parenteral suspension. Applications in pharmacy, that where we can apply suspension in pharmacy, and why we prepare for a suspension in pharmacy in pharmaceutical industries. So they are used to supply drugs to the patients in liquid form. Similarly, many people have difficulty swallowing solid dosage forms. Consequently, a liquid preparation has an advantage for these people. So those people which are having difficulty to swallow a solid dosage form like tablets, capsules, etc. So for those patients, what should be done? We should prepare suspension. The dose of a liquid form may be adjusted easily to meet the patient's requirements. The dose of a liquid form may be adjusted easily to meet the patient's requirements. Thus, if the drug is insoluble or poorly soluble, a suspension may be the most suitable dosage form. So we can prepare the dosage form like suspension for those drugs which are insoluble or poorly soluble. For the insoluble and poorly soluble, we can prepare a dosage form that is suspension. Drugs such as antibiotics that are unstable in the presence of an aqueous vehicle for extended periods of time are most frequently supplied as dry powder mixtures for reconstitution at the time of dispensing. Drugs such as antibiotics that are unstable in the presence of an aqueous vehicle. So mostly we dispense the antibiotics because antibiotics are unstable in the presence of an aqueous vehicle. So such type of antibiotic can be dispensed in dry powder mixtures for reconstitutions at the time of dispensing. This type of preparation is designated in the USP by the title for oral suspensions, and those antibiotics which are dispensed in the form of dry powder mixtures for reconstitutions at the time of dispensing. So USP, United States Pharmacopoeia, has given the title for such type of materials, for such type of drugs, the title for oral suspensions, for oral suspension. Suspension that don't require reconstitution at the time of dispensing are simply designated as oral suspension. In USP, United States Pharmacopoeia, for those suspensions for which there is no requirement of reconstitutions. So in USP Pharmacopoeia, the title which is used is oral suspension, while in case of the dry powder mixtures, as I told you, In USP, there is a word for oral suspensions. Generally, the taste of pharmaceuticals, the taste of pharmaceuticals can be improved if they are supplied in suspension form rather than solutions. Thus, chloramphenicol palmitate is used instead of the more soluble form, chloramphenicol. Insoluble drugs may be formulated as suspension for topical use, such as calamine lotion. Other preparations of suspension include parenteral preparations, ophthalmic preparations, aerosol suspensions, and medicated tropical preparation of suspension. That how can we prepare suspensions? So before going to discuss about the small scale preparation of suspension and large scale preparation of suspensions, the preparation of suspension involves several steps. The first is to obtain particles of the proper size, typically in the lower micrometer range. Oral preparation should not feel gritty. Topical preparation should feel smooth to the touch, and injectable should not produce tissue irritations. So before going to prepare in suspension on small scales and large scales, these are the basic points which must be considered before going to prepare suspension. The particle size, irritations of the tissue, grittiness of the particles, smoothness of the particles. So these are the different parameters which must be considered before going to prepare suspension. Particle size and distribution also should be considered in terms of bioavailability. Very small particles will have a higher solubility than larger particles, but also have a faster rate of dissolution. So therefore we consider to incorporate those particles in suspension which are having a small size. This particle size of dispersed solids in a suspension can influence the rate of sedimentation, flocculation, solubility, dissolution rate, and ultimately bioavailability. So the role of the particle size must be considered before going to prepare suspension. Particle size reduction is generally accomplished by dry milling prior to the incorporation of the disperse phase into the dispersion medium. Similarly, milling is the mechanical process of reducing particle size, which may be accomplished by a number of different types of machines, such as hammer mills, jet mills, and ball mills. So these are the different mills which are used for the reduction of the particle size. So in preparation of suspension, milling is the basic step which must be considered before going to prepare suspension. If you are going to prepare suspension, so how can we reduce the particles? We can reduce the particle size by milling process. So there are different instruments which are used for the reduction of the particle size, like hammer mills, jet mills, and ball mills, etc. On small scale, mortar and pestles are used for grinding and reducing particle size. After reducing particle size, the drug powder is wetted thoroughly with a small quantity of water miscible solvent such as glycerin or alcohol, which reduces the interfacial tension. Clear? As after reducing the particle size, what should be done? These the powder particles must be wetted thoroughly with small quantity of water miscible solvent. So what are those water miscible solvent? So for the examples of those water miscible solvents are glycerin and alcohol. The suspending agent in the aqueous medium is then added. As I told you in the definition, that in the preparation of suspension, the suspending agent must be added. Similarly, as in preparation of emulsion, we incorporate emulsifying agent, while in case of suspension, the suspending agent must be incorporated. Alternately, the suspending agent can be triturated with the drug particles using a small quantity of glycerin or alcohol, and then brought up to the volume with water and triturate to a smooth uniform product. And the final product must be smooth and uniform, and the particle distribution must be uniform throughout the liquid medium. On large scale, the fine particles are treated with small portion of water that contains the wetting agent and allowed to stand for several hours to release entrapped air. For releasing of the entrapped air, what should be done? We should wait for several hours, and we must allow to stand the materials, the particles, in small portion of water for several hours for the releasing of entrapped air. At the same time, the suspending agent should be dissolved or dispersed in the main portion of the external phase. The suspending agent must be or should be dissolved or dispersed in liquid medium. In that medium in which we are going to disperse or distribute the solid particles, and we should allow to stand until complete hydration takes place. Subsequently, wetted drug particles should be added slowly to the main portion of the dissolved suspending agent. Other excipients such as electrolytes or buffers should be carefully introduced, as in the preparation of tablets, capsules, emulsions, solutions, we mostly incorporate or add different excipients. So similarly, over here in the preparation of suspension, electrolytes, buffers and other excipients should be incorporated carefully. The preservative, flavoring agents and coloring agents are added last at the end of the preparation process. The preservatives, flavoring agents and coloring agents are added. Finally, the formulation is processed with homogenizers or colloidal mills to produce uniform product. For the production of uniform product, what should be done? The final formulation should be processed with homogenizers or colloidal mills. So why we use the colloidal mill or homogenizer? We use the homogenizer or colloidal mills for the uniform production of of the products. Extemporaneous mixture of suspension. Over here is the example of extemporaneous mixture of suspension. Trisulfur pyrimidine oral suspension. So in this case, as you can see in this formula, we incorporate Vegam 1 gram, syrup USP United States Pharmacopoeia syrup 90.60 gram, sodium citrate 0.78 gram, sulfur diazine 2.54 gram, sulfamerazine 2.54 gram, and sulfametazine 2.54 gram. So due to all these sulfur drugs, we use the term trisulfur pyrimidine oral suspension because of these three sulfur drugs, and the quantities of these three drugs is same, quantity is same, like 2.54 gram of sulfur diazine, 2.54 gram of sulfamerazine, and 2.54 gram of sulfametazine. Preparation. So if we are going to prepare the extemporaneous mixture of trisulfur pyrimidine oral suspension, so in this case, first of all, add Vegam slowly with continuous stirring to the syrup. To which type of syrup? USP syrup. First of all, we must incorporate Vegam slowly with continuous stirring to the syrup, and then incorporate sodium citrate into the Vegam syrup mixture. Sodium citrate into the Vegam syrup mixture. Then pre-mix the sulfur drugs. All three drugs must be pre-mixed, and then add to the syrup with stirring. To the syrup of what? To this sodium citrate and Vegam syrup mixture, and then add sufficient amount of 5% citric acid to adjust the pH of the product to 5.6. For the adjustment of pH, we must incorporate sufficient quantity of 5% citric acid, but the pH must not be less or above 5.6. At the end, we must incorporate preservative and flavoring agent to the product. So it was all about the preparation of the suspension, extemporaneous mixture of suspension, and the dose of these extemporaneous mixture of suspension, trisulfur pyrimidine oral suspension. The dose must be 5 ml BID and 2 times per day, base and dye 2 times a day, and the label, it must be written on the label, shake well before use, because it is suspension. So for the suspension emulsion, the label should be like shake well before use. And uses of these trisulfur pyrimidine oral suspension is, it is used as antimicrobial agent. It is used as antimicrobial agent. So these are the references for the today topic, from where I have taken all this material. So thank you so much. God bless you. Inshallah, in our coming lecture, we will try to discuss about the extemporaneous mixtures of powders, similarly extemporaneous mixtures of suppositories, etc. So thank you so much again. God bless you.